So if Canada says it's guided by values, but keeps making deals with countries accused of violating them, how should we understand that? Bessma Momani is a professor of political science at the University of Waterloo and a senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation. And Michael Taube is a columnist for several publications, including the National Post, Troy Media, and Loonie Politics. Michael, thank you for joining us in studio.
My pleasure.
Bessma, thank you so much for joining us online. Now, I want to start with you, Michael.
Sure.
Prime Minister Carney's speech at Davos signaled that Canada would be a pragmatic, calm voice.
Right.
In a rather chaotic world at the moment.
Of course.
Yet many see his support of the attacks on Iran as a departure from that. Your thoughts?
Well, I don't think very much so. Yes, I agree with you that Davos was the way it was. I wrote in the National Post, which didn't get a lot of great coverage on it, that I thought it was fine, but I didn't think it was this outstanding piece of great journalism. We have had great speeches from prime ministers in the past, conservatives and liberals both. It was fine. It did the trick. He got what he accomplished from it, and that's perfectly okay. In the issue of Iran, I think you have to look at it a little differently. Firstly, the relations with the United States and U.S. President Donald Trump are very different than they've been with previous presidents, whether they were Republicans or Democrats. For that reason, you obviously have to have a bit of a balancing act, which, to Carney's credit, I will admit he is trying to do as best he can, which is at times taking a position that Canada wants to be out of certain conflicts and doesn't want to be heavily involved, which, would push people back sort of to the days of Jean Chrétien, the war in Iraq in 2003. It could be somewhat related to that. But in the same sense, he also wants to ensure that there is still a pipeline between Canada and the United States, no matter how difficult it is, and no matter what people, including people who are watching the show today, actually think of Mr. Trump. And for that reason, I think he balanced it out as best he can, which is that Canada is irritated with Iran, which is a totalitarian regime. They are tyrants, they are evil people, and they deserve what's coming to them, but Canada wants to just leave it at that. So more words rather than action.
All right, Bessma, I want to get your take. Michael says the best that Mark Carney can do, but is this a departure from his Davos speech to what we're seeing right now?
No, I mean, I agree with Michael on the point that it wasn't an amazing speech, but I think it was what needed to be said at the time, what people wanted to hear. And that was really an important part of this, is that I think a lot of people heard what they wanted to hear. You could, if you want, take from the speech that it was sort of a defiance in favor of the rules-based international order. But I think what really stood out to me was the realpolitik of it all, that really we as Canadians have to start thinking about our interests. And that can sometimes come actually at the expense of some of our values and ideals. I mean, I would say that I think what Carney's trying to do is focus on what he's good at, which is getting this economy growing. This is an existential crisis that we're in with the trade wars with Washington. We have never, ever assumed that this relationship would be so sour. I think even in the heyday, as I'm sure historians can say, I mean, even, when Pierre Elliott Trudeau went to Washington, I think what we're seeing today is the worst of this bilateral relationship. And so I think what he is trying to do is keep that in mind at all times. And that's not necessarily going to make a lot of Canadians happy, because we kind of got used to this moral high ground that, frankly, the Trudeau government often took, sometimes ad nauseum, without a lot to back it up with. It was just words and rhetoric, and not much else. I think Carney's more cognizant of what power we do have, and I think he's trying to play a very delicate balancing act. On Iran, I actually think for him the challenge was. And no one's going to, really defend the regime here, but it's more important that the reality of having a strong diaspora community in this country, that on the whole, I mean, it's not consistent, but on the whole was supportive of some sort of intervention. I think that is an opinion that has soured tremendously since the war actually started, because of, frankly, the unbelievable calamity of the critical infrastructure that has been hit, the death and killing of 160 schoolgirls. I mean, the mood in the diaspora has soured and changed. But at the beginning of this, keeping in mind we've got this ally, our big elephant next door that we need to, keep content. And we know Trump takes everything personal. So any sort of critique of the war would have really hurt us in some way or another. And then also the factor of our diaspora community that on the whole, generally, we're supportive of some intervention. And again, with the caveat of, I think that mood has changed significantly since then.
All right, I want to pivot away from Iran for a moment. Let's look at a few examples of our foreign policy that has come under criticism. We talked about the economy growing, so I'm going to talk about some trade deals. Canada signed a $1 billion deal with the United Arab Emirates last year, despite the country's alleged involvement in Sudan's ongoing civil war. Canada has signed trade deals with India and China, despite allegations of foreign interference. Canada has condemned Russia's war on Ukraine as well, the ongoing war there. Given all of this, Michael, does Canada apply its foreign policy selectively?
Yes, but I think you could say that most democracies do. I mean, unfortunately, politics is a game. It's one I've been involved in many years of my life. And as I said before, it has to be a balancing act. Sometimes you have to accept the fact that the actors or political actors you deal with are not necessarily your best friends every moment. So you have to balance it out as best you can. You use some good examples, and people have also said China as well. There's been an extensive amount of trade with that. That was highly questionable, based on years of issues that we had with the former Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, and the Liberal government related to that. I think you do things the best you can, and I don't, I'm obviously no fan of Mr. Carney, and I don't think the economy is, as Bess was saying, I don't think it's going to be that great, but I recognize what he has to do. He's a far more competent individual than Mr. Trudeau. I would not argue that. And for that reason, he recognizes by taking his experience as a bank governor or working in the private sector and applying it to dealing with people from Donald Trump to the UAE and others, he can actually make a good go of it. And with the UAE, I think that a lot of people are looking at that with the issue of Sudan. You're quite right. At the same time, the UAE has been held in a very different regard in the West since they signed that deal to sort of recognize Israel and have better relations. For a lot of Western countries, that was a sign that the UAE had, shall we say, turned the corner. And for that reason, people look at them differently. Should they? That's questionable, but that's what they're doing.
All right, I'll follow up with you, but Bessma, I want to get you in on this. Given all of this and what Michael has said, does Canada apply its foreign policy selectively?
Absolutely. And there's lots of hypocrisy throughout history. It's undoubtedly the case. I mean, I think if you think of this, let's just do this very mathematically. 85% of our trade is with the United States.
Right.
What's left? 15%. And the truth of the matter is the areas and regions of the world and countries that are growing are not democracies, are not necessarily like-minded countries. This is not where we're going to make trade deals and where there are economic growth. So again, if we're going to put our interests first and foremost, in the case, I think, of of Carney, I think he is very keen and laser focused on the economy. You can't discount countries like China and India and the UAE. These are countries with pretty impressive growth. And I get it for a lot of us who really do feel, and it's almost a mythology Canadians have of ourselves, that somehow we're above all of that and we're just so righteous. It's really hard for us to come to terms with the reality that, wait a minute, we're going to do business deals with unsavory characters. It's a reality, folks. I don't know how you're going to grow this economy and create those kinds of international partnerships without being honest to yourself to say that the countries that are growing that we need to sign deals with are just not going to be like-minded. And that's it. That's the reality. If it's a bread and butter issue, then we sort of have to forego some of those ideals. And it's not a comfortable situation for Canadians because we haven't been here before. We really did ride this beautiful, white horse, thinking that we were really above it, all of it.
Michael, did you want to add to that?
Sometimes Don Quixote is not great, but
Right.
I agree entirely with what Bessma is saying, and she's right. You have to look at it this way, not to be a parrot, but 85% of our trade is with the United States. And obviously there are a lot of Canadians today who are very frustrated with U.S. President Donald Trump and the way he's handling things. We all understand that. Bessma understands it. I do, you do, and all the viewers do. At the same time, you just can't ignore them. I know some Canadians think you can and basically state that, well, Mr. Carney is looking for all these other deals. He's moving completely away from the U.S. He's moving partially away. Whether that's right or wrong is a debatable issue and something we might discuss today. But in the end, ultimately, Canada and the U.S. have been longtime allies, friends, trading partners, military partners. We are indelibly tied to this country, whether people like it or not. And the key is, which a lot of people still forget because there's still a few more years to go, is that Donald Trump will not be president forever. I know some people keep saying king, and it's not going to happen. Let's not be silly. He's going to leave eventually, and there will be a new president, be it a Democrat or Republican. We'll see what things are like, but it will be different, and that's what we have to keep in mind.
With everything that's been said, Michael, is there a disconnect between the kind of foreign policy Canada wants versus what it has adopted and what we've seen so far?
Every government that's been in play, including Stephen Harper's government, who I worked for as a speechwriter, obviously we look at things very differently. You know, one easy example, and Lloyd Axworthy talked about it recently in his Toronto Star column, talking about the UN Charter, or the United Nations Charter. There are a lot of people, not just conservatives like me, who have written or said for years that the United Nations is a shell of its former self. It's not what the League of Nations once was, which was imperfect, but at least managed things with countries that were fairly like-minded. The United Nations, if you look sort of the ABCs, the agencies, boards, and commissions, and the way that people, you know, countries that are totalitarian regimes, rogue states, and others got onto things involving nuclear disarmament and whatnot, which Iran and Iraq were both two examples of, it drove people wild and drove people mad to the point where you thought you had to reform it. Mr. Axworthy, you know, with due deference to him, still believes that there is an important measure that the United Nations can do, and there are important things it can produce still in society. I'm less so of that thought, and I think a lot more conservatives are certainly like me, but some people on the left now recognize that if the United Nations is not what it once was, for example, it means that the whole game has changed. Much the same way for Canada, we have to manage our own affairs differently as well. What was past may not necessarily be present.
All right, well, Bessma, I want to pick up on the comments about former Foreign Minister Lloyd Axworthy. This was something that he actually had written earlier this year when talking about Iran. We invoke international law and the rules-based international order when adversaries engage in unlawful actions, but abandon those same rules entirely when it's the Americans. He goes on to say that it is recklessness. What are your thoughts?
It's not just recklessness. I mean, I agree with that point, but, you know, rules of engagement are necessary because it's what keeps us civil. At the end of the day, if we start, you know, practicing might is right and not consider these rules that have been thoughtfully thought out by so many jurists that include Canadian jurists who are instrumental in this whole process, you know, it becomes the law of the jungle. And, you know, what's happening today is, I mean, the fact that, you know, again, a school, refineries, you know, this is unacceptable. These are not targets. And, you know, unfortunately, I think if we start to lose our morality in the hype of war, I mean, some of the stuff that Pete Hegseth has said recently, and even Trump, the sort of, you know, the smiles and the actual joy they're getting out of all of these murders is unbelievable to me. And I think this dehumanization that we've seen of the Iranian people, I mean, I'm sorry, with all due respect, Michael, but calling them evil, I mean, we just can't use words like that. We have to be, I think, really cognizant that there is an effort to dehumanize in this war, in all war, and even in our own, you know, desire to want to point out that this regime is horrendous, because the Iranian people know that first and foremost. We just can't use those kinds of words. And I'm afraid, and I have no faith in the Trump administration and Pete Hegseth. I mean, calling this a Department of War, again, that very almost excitement and joy they get out of it. You see it in the speeches. I can't help it. I'm not a psychologist. I know I'm a political scientist, but you just see the happiness they're getting out of the pain and suffering of others. This is just wrong. And so I have a lot of problems with the framing of how we're looking at this. And what I think Lloyd Axworthy was getting at is we need to really respect these rules. It's not right to have totalitarian regimes on human rights panels, to Michael's point that we saw throughout the UN. That's just not right. But we also have to be really careful in understanding that those rules are about keeping us civil in times where barbarity really has a way of, frankly, constantly, you know, wanting to shine out. We need to try to tamp that and focus on ensuring that those rules of engagement are actually followed through.
Michael, do you hear those concerns?
I know what Bessma's saying, and I understand it. Look, the reason I use the word evil is I differentiate between the Islamic Republic of Iran and the Iranian people. The Iranian people are not. The ones who have come over to this country are peaceful, democratic-loving individuals who want to work in society for their families, for themselves. They are good people. They are frustrated by what they see overseas. They are furious that they cannot go home to their own country and that they feel unsafe. That's why I use it. But I take Bessma's point. I'm not arguing it. Obviously, you know, this is the way political people sort of are. We, you know, we use our words in certain ways, but regardless, I know what she's saying and I understand what she's saying, but I think you have to call a spade as a spade. And unfortunately, that's just the world I come from. So if you think something is bad, you have to say it's bad. You can't say it's good. It doesn't mean that you can't find solutions. And there may be a solution, whether it be, you know, the Pavlai, who has obviously been, you know, is waiting, hopefully, to somehow come back, as he said, either as a temporary leader or as a leader of Iran, or someone else from within internally, which Trump has actually said might be the best option. You have to look at it that way. So I don't have an issue with calling it evil, but I understand when people say that. And certainly, it's a tense time. I get it.
All right, Bessma, I want to have a better understanding of what you think Canada's foreign policy approach should be with everything that is going on right now.
Look, I get the sentiment of wanting to be pragmatic, and I think that is the right choice. I think, you know, Carney's emphasis on thinking about the economy, being laser focused on that is key. And actually, this war, I mean, back to what is in our interest, the prolonging of this war to the global economy is horrendous. I don't think we realize how terrible this is going to be on so many countries. I mean, you know, CBC had a wonderful piece about, you know, cooking oil being in shortage in India. We are looking at, this is the plantation season for much of the West. And frankly, fertilizers are not going to be coming out of the straits. This has never happened before. We've had so many flare-ups, you know, in Iran and in the region, but to see the Strait of Hormuz completely shut, we haven't seen since the 1980s. So we were already on, frankly, unstable footing with high debt, you know, trade disruptions, a lot of uncertainty, as we all know, geopolitically. So this is just not going to be, I think, a good outcome for us in our interest to see the global economy humming again. We just simply can't afford it. And so I really do hope that there's an effort by, you know, the Carney you know, government and folks around him to start focusing on our strategic long-term interests of economic growth and to get this war done and finished. And I think it's going to be really hard because the off-ramps don't seem to be there. And we all know the Trump administration is honestly very incompetent in executing this war, but even worse so, it's not just the execution, it's actually having an objective and then wanting to actually meet what is those objectives. He does not know what the outcome should be. He thought it was going to be a Venezuela 3-day turnover, and there would be a Darcy Rodriguez inside, you know, the Iranian regime who will say, yes, we'll just send you our oil and not a problem, you know, and bow to the master. That's not happening. And so I think we are in for a longer run because, frankly, the incompetency in the White House just doesn't know what they're doing.
The world is a very different place since you worked for the Harper government.
No kidding.
So I imagine the foreign policies that we would apply then would not apply now. But I do have to ask, if you had the ear of the Canadian Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Annette, what would you be saying to her?
Besides the fact she wouldn't listen to me. But yes, I guess I would say this. Obviously, when Stephen Harper, you know, who I work for, my old friend and boss, was prime minister, he actually made us more of a foreign policy leader than a peacekeeper. We still did peacekeeping. Right. Nothing changed that way. But in Afghanistan, for example, we took the lead and we build, you know, we helped women, we built water, we basically helped develop the country up to our certain point. You know, we're a middle power. We're not as big as other countries. There's only so much we can do in certain ways. I would like to see a balance of the two again. I've seen a lot more of a shift to peacekeeping, which is traditional. We know Lester Pearson and others obviously use that to their advantage, and that's perfectly fine. I think the best thing still is for Canada to be a foreign policy leader. And while the speech in Davos, some people believed was an example of it, I don't, because it's words. You have to do it also with actions. So if I had Miss Annan's ear, I would say to her, you don't have to do what Stephen Harper did before. I don't expect you to, but I would like more of a balance. And I think in the end, that's the way a middle power like Canada can have a real influence on the world scene.
Well, you're going to have to leave it there. Michael, Bessma, really appreciate your time and your insights on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.